With Russia's invasion of Ukraine, foreign policy everywhere has entered a new era. For Canada, that likely means a reorientation and reevaluation of how we think about security across the vast northern part of this country, the Arctic. With us to examine that reality, and we'll introduce our guests, as is our custom, from furthest away to closest to our studio, beginning in Calgary, Alberta, with Rob Huber. He is Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Calgary. In the nation's capital, retired Lieutenant General Andrew Leslie. He was the Deputy Commander of the NATO Land Forces in Afghanistan, also formerly a Member of Parliament for Orleans or Orléans, depending on what part of town you're in. Here in our studio, Janice Stein, Bellsberg Professor of Conflict Management in the Department of Political Science and former founding director of the U of T's Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. And Adam Chapnick is here, professor in the Department of Strategic Studies at RMC, the Royal Military College, and Deputy Director of Education at the Canadian Forces College. And it is really great to have you four back on our airwaves for a timely and important conversation that I'd like to kick off by, I guess, citing something recent testimony to the Commons Defense Committee from General Wayne Eyre. That's our Chief of Defense Staff, who warned that if Russia and China were to cooperate in the Arctic, it would, quote, pose significant threats to Canada's ability to protect its sovereignty. And I want to find out from all of you how big a deal you think that is. General Leslie, start us off if you would.
It's a really big deal, Steve. It's, quite frankly, our Arctic is undefended. We have a few scattering of regular force, a couple of air bases up there, which are only occupied a couple of days of the year. We've got the Canadian Rangers, who are magnificent, but are not actually recruited, trained, or equipped to fight. We have no significant sea or airborne surveillance capabilities, such as big drones or new long-range patrol aircraft. And the Arctic patrol vessels are just getting into service, but they're certainly not capable of operating in a combat environment. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that with the Russian bear rampaging across Europe, though they're getting their buttocks handed to them by the Ukraine, and the Chinese dragon rustling its scales, we should be paying a lot more attention and putting a lot more money into defending our Arctic.
Well, we can do the first over the next half hour. I'm not sure we can do much about the last, but I'm going to ask Janice Stein the same question. How significant do you think this threat is to Canadian sovereignty?
I really agree with both General Eyre and General Leslie that we are a three-ocean country, Steve, but we
don't think about the northern one much.
We don't think enough about the northern one, and it really does matter. If we just think 10 years forward and we assume that the ice will continue to melt more or less at the same pace, the Northwest Passage will be fully open. The shipping time between Asia and Europe will be cut in half. So right now, the largest Arctic research institute in the world is where? Beijing. Beijing. Now that tells you how strategic this part of the world is. And as Andy just put it, it's our waterway, it's our territory, and we don't have adequate capabilities, never mind to engage in combat, but adequate surveillance capabilities.
Just to police our sovereignty.
To police and to know and to see what's going on.
Rob Huber, what do you say to that?
Well, first of all, it's not a threat to our sovereignty. We have to be very clear because there's often a misuse of term here. But there is a dire, and I would say existential threat to our security. The one thing that hasn't entered into the conversation that even extends further what was said at the House of Commons Committee is no one is talking about the new nuclear reality that we have. We, of course, have Putin talking about the possible use of nuclear weapons. No one has had a close look of the American response, which was enunciated in their strategic policy that came out last week, which basically introduced a concept called integrated deterrence, which really is talking about the possibility of the use of nuclear weapons. Now, why does this pertain to the Canadian Arctic? Because if we look at the bulk of the Russian forces, they are in the Arctic. Any type of a response, any containment, any fighting of a nuclear war will, by its very nature, be in the Arctic. And Canada should be playing a critical role in all of this, because to maintain ongoing deterrence, to stop the Russians and the Chinese from even thinking about this in the first place, we have to show that we know where they're coming from. And now with the new American policy, We have to show that we were able to actually engage and fight the Russians and Chinese should they take this avenue. And this is something that's not even entering into the any dialogue within the Canadian context, let alone dealing with the protection of the sovereignty of the Northwest Passage.
Okay, let me do a follow-up with Adam here, and I'm going to just turn the question a little bit on its ear for you, Adam. The fragility of our Arctic border is something that has been referenced, for decades. This is not a new problem. Do you think Canada's Foreign Affairs establishment has adequately had its attention paid to this problem?
I think that we, generally speaking, in Canada and foreign policy, take our time with these things. Sometimes it's to our benefit. Sometimes these problems go away for whatever reason. Sometimes they don't. When they don't, it's more to our detriment. I think one of the benefits, actually, of slow walking this one is that I'm not sure, I understand the security threat that my colleagues are talking about. I'm much more concerned about an economic threat, and that I don't find Russia and China to be equal partners. I find that Russia is not proving itself to be particularly powerful in that partnership right now, and the Chinese have a much greater interest in economics. And it's the Chinese economic interest in the Arctic. If they can leverage Russia as a weaker partner, that would make me concerned, because Russia has most of the Arctic to itself. If that becomes Chinese Arctic, then there is no way to keep the Chinese from shaping the global governance regime around Arctic security and the environment up there.
Janice, I'm going to put another quote to you, because the new French ambassador to Canada apparently gave an interview in the National Post, said, quote, "Canada is now confronted with a situation where NORAD looks like an old Volvo 240. I mean, it's strong, but you have to beef it up." That's what he said. In your view, is the situation that dire to make a new ambassador that blunt in one of his first interviews?
I have to say that was a singular comment by a French ambassador on Canadian soil. But actually, I think that one is a little over the top, largely, Steve, because we do have a roadmap for updating NORAD. There's good track laid between the United States and Canada. And we've slow walked it, but we're gonna get it done. I'm more concerned about the Arctic because we don't have really a roadmap. And I don't think the real issue here is the use of nuclear weapons in the Arctic or even direct combat between us and the Russians. I do think there are huge economic interests in the Arctic. And if we can't survey, patrol, know, which is the responsibility of any sovereign government over its territory, and do that at speed and at scale, we are putting our own interests at work.
Andrew Leslie, I've heard this expression now, we're slow walking this problem a couple of times, and I just want to ask you about that, because we are sitting here in Toronto in the William G. Davis studio, named after the former premier, whose operating philosophy was never put off until tomorrow, what you can avoid doing altogether. I'm being a little facetious, but he got criticized for that over the years. But it was also his experience that a lot of problems went away if you didn't overreact too quickly. Is there something to be said for that here?
No, not in the slightest, and I'll tell you why. A whole bunch of folk declared a peace dividend a couple of decades ago, been coasting on that, been introducing a variety of very expensive social programs, and well done to them if they can afford to do so, while maintaining a certain minimum degree of deterrence against potential enemies. When Putin invaded Ukraine, he took a look around and he figured for his own sociopathic reasons that this was the time to go. But let's not kid ourselves. He went because he thought he could win. And the reason why he thought he could win is that NATO was not ready with conventional forces to actually deter in sufficient strength, which would cause him to hesitate, pause, and then reconsider. And by the way, he still keeps coming, even though actually he's doing a little bit more running away than attacking right now. Same is true of the Arctic. And with all due respect, I disagree with the assertion that this is not a question of sovereignty. Why? Because China is building more icebreakers than we can dream about.
All right.
And where are they going to operate? Well, it's logical to assume they're going to be operating in the Arctic, which, by the way, is split between really two nations, Russia and Canada. Yes, there are others involved, certainly in smaller numbers. But if we don't patrol, if we don't, as Janice mentioned, have resources to look and to feel and to get a better understanding of what's there so we can respond, either in a police role or some other, then we'll start to lose our sovereignty.
All right, let me get Rob Hubert to comment on that, because you said this was less about sovereignty and more about security. Seems General Leslie does not concur. What do you say?
Well, the problem is, of course, is when we talk about sovereignty, what we're talking about is the ability to actually have others acknowledge that these are Canadian waters. Nobody questions in terms of the land. So there's not a sovereignty issue over the land. It's over whether or not we allow ships to come into the Northwest Passage. Now, we can get into all sorts of discussion, but ultimately, the essence of what General Leslie is saying is that we need to have that ability to control against those such as China that are coming in or near to these waters. That, in my view, is, of course, a security requirement. And in other words, whether or not we give the Zhu Long permission to go through the Northwest Passage, as we did in 2017, isn't as important as whether or not we have the underwater listening capabilities for when they start sending submarines in or near the waters. And that's, of course, a security threat, in my view. And that's really, once again, going back to your question, are we prepared? Remember in the June announcement, when we're talking about NORAD modernization, there was absolutely no mention of underwater detection systems, no mention on what we're doing with the Russian new autonomous underwater vehicles, let alone what we expect from the Chinese in the future. And I mean, I agree with the general on that point, that the security part is completely lacking from the Canadian side.
All right, you mentioned underwater, and I want to go to you, Adam, on that. Wayne Eyre, Chief of Defence Staff, also asked for more dollars to enhance Canada's, quote, underwater presence at the Arctic and a greater capacity to move troops. So give us a sense about what that actually looks like.
I think one of the challenges, before you even think about what it looks like, is whether we have the capacity to use that money if we got it right now. So even before we get to the question, is we're reconstituting the Canadian Armed Forces. We have all sorts of challenges there. So in some ways, I think the Chief of the Defence Staff is putting down a marker that we're going to need to do this. It's not a matter of we're going to do it yet, but we're going to need to do this, and we need the government to commit to doing this so that once we have the capability to start doing these things, the money will be there for it.
Because we don't have the people for it today.
Don't have the people to do a lot of things right now.
Janice.
I think it's interesting because I agree with Adam, but I think there's two big pieces of the story that we're missing here. The first is that our civilian sector is state-of-the-art capable in underwater sensing. We have an oceans cluster on the Atlantic coast in this country that is frankly the envy of many around the world and does incredible stuff in sensing. So I think one of the ways we have to start thinking about this is not necessarily only as a military problem, but as there's opportunities for collaboration here with civilian companies that are pioneering in technology. I think we're missing the boat on that one. The second big piece when we talk about what we know, what we see, is the role of our Indigenous leaders. There is a circumpolar conference that operates. We are going to get this wrong again. I can't say it more bluntly than that. We're going to get this wrong again.
Get what wrong?
We're going to get defense and security in the Arctic wrong unless we have partnerships with Indigenous peoples who live in that part of the world, know it, live on it, and understand the land in ways that nobody who doesn't live in the far north does.
And are they thinking about that right now?
Not enough.
Not enough. Okay. General Leslie, I want to come back to this notion that we can't even begin to think about how to spend additional dollars on things that we've been talking about until we fill 10,000 empty positions, which is currently the problem with the Canadian Armed Forces, in addition to, I think, the highest attrition rate in 15 years. Why is all that happening right now?
Very often a simple explanation can be found by following the money. So since the Liberal government came to power, they have unspent, reprofiled, not spent, carried forward, delayed, whatever bureaucratic nonsense term you want to apply to it, $15 billion that was meant for defense procurement, promised for defense procurement, but couldn't be got out the door. And the reason why they couldn't get it out the door, in other words, the reason why they couldn't buy equipment, is the bureaucracy were responding to their political leaders, and essentially was go slow. That's why this year alone, D&D handed back in $3 billion. By the way, if you understand by $2 to $3 billion out of your theoretical allocation every year, guess what 10,000 people cost you per year? About 1.4, 1.5 billion. So if D&D doesn't have the money to take them in and to train them and equip them, they can't recruit them. And that's what's happening. there's a relatively simple explanation. And my plea to the government of Canada would be, get off your derrieres, start spending the money more quickly and more efficiently than you've ever done in the past over the previous 7 years, because whatever you're doing is not working. Our warship contract is now a couple of decades should have been signed. Same is true of the new fighters. Same is true of a whole host of equipment capabilities and training and recruiting efforts. So, get rid of the gatekeepers and start getting on with it, quite frankly.
We've heard that expression before. Okay. Rob, let me go to you on this one, and that is, China's 1 billion people, Russia's over 100 million people. We're a long way behind. Do we simply have too small a population to think seriously about patrolling, expressing our sovereignty this far away from the major centers of the country?
No, we don't. I mean, it's getting what all three of my co-panelists are saying. It's a lack of political will. And the part of the conversation we haven't had, and I mean, just to pile on this inability to buy, we have said we are going to be building a big icebreaker, basically to replace the Louis Saint Laurent. We made that decision back on September 10th, 1985, that we're going to do it. What year is it now? And do we have a big icebreaker? And so, a pox on both the Liberals and the Conservatives in this regards. But let's look at and this is where I can push back a little bit on Janice saying that there's not a threat. Have a look at what the Nordic countries have been doing in terms of their ability, because they recognized the threat when the Russian invasion actually began, which is 2014. Of course, in Canada, we call it an illegal occupation, which is BS. I mean, it was a military invasion, full stop. It's another different word that we don't want to engage. But you have a look at the Finns, you have a look at the Danes. They were both able to make the decision, change. For the Danes, it was a 180-degree change to buy the F-35. So they go through the process as, okay, we've changed our mind because of the new threat. We're going to go for the F-35s, and they've done it. The Finns, 2.5 years also to do it. The Norwegians are now allowing American attack nuclear-powered subs not only to come into their ports, but they're also allowing them to be serviced in the port. And we see a Nordic branch of NATO that is very comparable to NORAD in terms of the shared aerospace. They've all signed very close operation signs with the Americans. They're engaging in the Americans to prepare for this extended deterrence, which means how do we fight in the north? And Canada, of course, is totally lacking. And to get to the heart of your question, if the Norwegians, Danes, Finns, Icelanders can figure out how to do this since the war started in 2014, and we're still sitting here having this conversation in 2022, I mean, it's just simply a lack of political will. And,
Okay,
I can't think of anything else.
Let Janice wants in on you.
Well, look, I don't think that the principal threat to the Arctic is a Russian invasion of the Canadian Arctic or a Russian attack. Well, we disagree on that. And frankly, tragically, what's happened to the Russian military over the last 6 months has probably made it less likely, not more likely. This is a shattered, fractured army that is going to take a decade to rebuild in Russia if there's decent leadership. And I don't see any prospect of that. So I don't think that's the right frame. And the reason I say it that way is I don't think we will buy the right assets if that's what we focus on. I think the issue is it is the epicenter of a strategic waterway that is going to change shipping patterns. We do not have the capacity to see what they are going to do underwater. It is the surveillance, patrol, and sensing capacity that, to me, is we can't do anything. Rob and I can have this argument for another 10 years, but we don't know what's happening underwater. It doesn't matter because we won't have a capacity to respond.
It's part of, or sorry.
Go ahead, please. Yes.
Sorry. It's also part of a larger picture. And I would submit to you that the current government, certainly, the one I can speak about most because I was a member of it for a time, are essentially pacifist in nature. They don't believe in defense spending. And I think sort of subconsciously and perhaps not so subconsciously, they're willing to fight to the last American in terms of the friendships and the allies that we've got who are willing to go overseas and do stuff. Am I suggesting that Canada is a great power and should spend accordingly? No, of course not. But we have to do a proportional share.
Yeah.
And so when you have the Secretary General of NATO who visits here less than a month ago and says, by the way, NATO has to do more to defend the Arctic, pointing right up north,
Yeah.
that's a pretty pointed message. When the United Kingdom Chief of Defense Staff says, hey, by the way, if you guys want help, I can, send a couple of submarines up there to patrol under the ice for you and maybe show your soldiers how to use the Arctic terrain to better advantage. Ouch.
Adam,
So
he's
I'll stop there.
okay. Well, Andrew Leslie has sort of pointed to one of the typical things one hears about Canadian defense policy, which is basically, if we're in trouble, we call Washington. We've been doing too much of that?
I think that it makes sense to leverage the most powerful country in the world with whom you have an excellent relationship whenever you can. If you can allow yourself to spend less on security and more on other things, I don't see why that's a bad idea. Now, pushing it too far to the point that the Americans take you for granted is a bigger problem. But the basic idea that we recognize that we have the best ally we could possibly imagine and that we're going to leverage what they give to us. I don't see a problem with that. The problem is taking it for granted. So I think there are two different things here.
Rob, you want to take that on?
Yeah, absolutely. If we want to see what the future is coming, remember that it was under the Trump administration, Pomp, and particularly the Secretary of State at an Arctic Council meeting, where he specifically says that the Canadian claim to the Northwest Passage is problematic to the U.S. And we think that the only reason why the Americans under Trump did not launch a freedom of navigation voyage through the Northwest Passage that would have broken up the 1988 agreement that we've had with the Americans that has worked very well is the fact that they didn't have any ships because one of their icebreakers had an engine fire. And I think that was the only thing that saved us from having a direct challenge. And if we look at the American system right now, we have a very possible re-election of Trump or a Trump-like individual who says that NATO is not doing enough as it is, and NATO is spending a lot more than Canada is spending in terms of either NORAD or NATO. I think that those that say that we can ultimately depend on the United States, that the United States will always have our back, they see us as something different. I think that they're living in the past. I think we have a new United States, and I think this whole issue about depending on them is going to go out the window come the next presidential election.
Steve, just let me quickly go back to something that Andy Leslie just said. NATO faces serious challenges in Europe. And there is a rationalization of effort where everybody does what's closest and what they can do best. So I think you're right to point to the fact that the Brits said to us, what are you doing up there? Do you know what's going on underwater? We don't have an answer to that question. And frankly, the United States, which finds itself right now stretched to the point where their available stockpiles are diminishing at an enormously rapid rate because they didn't anticipate the kind of challenge they're facing in Ukraine either. They're saying to us, will you look after the Arctic?
Well,
now, that makes a lot of sense, but we have to do it.
Here's why, maybe. I'm going to put some numbers out here, and then General Leslie, I'd like to hear you on this. Since February 2022, this is the invasion of Ukraine, Canada has provided $600 million of military assistance to Ukraine. In that same period of time, the United States, $17 billion. Now, when you consider that they're 10 times bigger, we're nowhere close to being within a factor of 10 of the contribution the U.S. is making. So I ask the question, General Leslie, is Canada doing enough?
If you look at the dollar value, actually $600 million is not bad at all. But if you look at the military assistance for a nation which has its back to the wall and is desperately struggling and fighting and clawing their way through Russian offensives, and now on an offensive of their own, they need combat capability. So Canada has essentially been writing checks. Yeah. Okay, fine. But in terms of contribution of combat systems, we've sent really 4 now aging howitzers, 10 barrels. Most of those have been shot out, so they've got to be replaced. And really, that's it. They've asked for a whole host of other stuff, which we've not been able to provide because our own stocks here in Canada are so minimalist. We don't have any air defense system right now, either low level, medium, or high altitude, zero. by the way, there's a whole bunch of distinguished academics on the panel. I challenge you to find any other nation in the world which has no air defense system. Go ahead. So we don't have any anti-tank system. We don't, and at least not handheld. And there's a whole myriad of other skill sets and capabilities that we're missing, or which we might have been able to provide if we had them. So we have to do more. We have to be seen to be doing more because we're part of a coalition of the willing. We believe in what the Ukraine's doing. We recognize the dangers of Russia and the looming threat of China, mainly to our Arctic in our context. And I've yet to see any energy or any leadership at the strategic level saying, here's what we're going to do, and we're going to do it fairly quickly. We rearmed quite quickly at the height of the Afghan war. In comparison to what's going on right now, Afghanistan was a relatively minor affair, though we paid our fair share, more than that, in blood and treasure. It's time we stepped up to the plate and actually stopped talking about it and start doing it, starting with the Arctic.
Just a few minutes to go. And Adam, do you agree that it's time to step up to the plate for this country?
I would love to see this government spend more on defense. I don't think the public is asking them to. I think that in that context, it makes it a lot harder. I think writing checks is the easiest and the most logical thing to do when there isn't public pressure. I do want to add, though, that we should put some dollar value to refugees that are coming here, that is a contribution this country is making that other countries would struggle to make in the same way because our system is more effective. So we're not completely ignoring this situation, and I think the government is acting prudently. Would I like to see it act more boldly? Yeah, probably, but I can understand prudence in the political context in which we operate here.
Apropos of the gatekeeper comment we heard earlier, do we have any reason to believe, Janice, that if Pierre Poilievre wins the next election and the Conservatives take over the government, that things will improve on this file?
Well, again, we've all talked about some of the institutional obstacles to procurement. A pox on both houses. Procurement is a long, unending, enduring, miserable story in this country and proceeds at a snail's pace. I don't even think it's political will. I think it's something more insidious, in all honesty, which is the fear of making a mistake. But I think the Accountability Act is the worst thing that ever happened to this country because it paralyzed our civil service. And if you make a mistake, you're on the front page of the Globe, and you get one clause in that contract wrong, and there are allegations of corruption or inefficiency. And it's just a huge issue inside that the process requirements around procurement are probably some of the thickest of any country in the world. When you talk about whether we should be doing more, Steve, it's important also to look at the economic assistance that we're given. Ukraine is in the fight for its life, frankly, but its economy is virtually bankrupt. It's not only Zelensky, it's others who are really looking at what it will take Ukraine to sustain its economy, recover $50 billion. We are giving economic assistance at a higher rate than almost any of our peers. As Adam says, that probably makes sense because we don't have stockpiled stuff to give. And in an emergency, that's what we're doing.
Okay, let me get Robin here in our last minute here. If we look back when Stephen Harper was in power, is there anything about the way the Conservatives then did business which might lead you to believe that if Pierre Poilievre becomes the next prime minister, things will improve?
Modernization of the frigates and the C-17s. If there's the political will, we can do it. The frigates were modernized under expense, and it was done under schedule. And the C-17, which everybody agrees is a major contribution to the Canadian capability today, was also done. So I don't accept that there's other institutional elements. If the political leadership's this shall be done, we've seen the two cases where it was done. And once again, to take General Ayres' point, the Chinese, when they invade Taiwan, and the Americans completely change their strategic position, Canada's going to be faced with a reality that is going to be very uncomfortable for it. And I think that the more that we can prepare for it, the less that the damage to both our relationships and our economic relationships will be there.
That's Rob Hubert from the University of Calgary. My thanks as well to General Andrew Leslie, who came to us from the nation's capital. Here in the studio, Janice Stein from the Munk School, Adam Chapnick from RMC. It's really great having you four on our airwaves tonight to go into what is a complicated and difficult issue. But I got to think that we're all a little smarter right now, thanks to the four of you being here. So much appreciated.
Thanks, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.